Welcome back to Taking Inventory. This week we have a special episode. We're welcoming back James Avery, the CEO of Kevel. I was on vacation the last time that James came on, so this is especially exciting for me. And I'm also kind of seeing double here with two Jameses, two experts in ad tech, two API guys. So let me get my bearings, but welcome back, James.
Hey, thanks for having me back so quickly.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And this week we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. This episode, we're going to talk all things Twitter, whether it's finances, whether it's competition. And we're not just going to point out the problems, but, we actually want to propose some solutions. So let's jump right in and let's actually start with a recent tweet from Elon about their finances. I think last week, he posted that the company is still negative cash flow, that they've seen about a 50% drop in advertising revenue amongst a host of other challenges. But let's start there. 50% drop in advertising.
I think we all can kind of see some of the things that led to this 50% drop in advertising. I think what's really interesting is to think about what are the actions that Twitter can take? What can Elon do from here? What can Linda do here to turn that around, right?
Yeah. And I think from, James, given kind of your perspective of building across, DSPs and more of like the open web, curious kind of, do you think that there's an opportunity for Twitter to rethink maybe like some of their formats?
I think you see this a lot of times with walled gardens. To kind of bootstrap the walled garden, they will use some sort of programmatic approach, right? Like Facebook had the, whatever that was called, like the Facebook exchange at one point, right? And like Twitter ads started, or a big part of it was when they bought MoPub, right? Which was a lot of programmatic. And so I do think there's something in between, right? I don't think it's just, hey, let's slap, crappy programmatic ads into Twitter. That doesn't really solve a problem. Cause I like walled gardens. I think people should build walled gardens, but I also think that brands like buying through the trade desk. I think if you're trying to court these brands back to Twitter, then you should enable them to buy that through the trade desk, right? Enable them to use some of the data that they want to use, enable them to, manage it through that console. I think it can be done in the right way where it's not, it's not open programmatic. It's saying, hey, like, we're trying to get Procter and Gamble. Let's let them go to the trade desk and buy their Twitter campaigns and manage their Twitter campaigns and use all that data about, who's about to, have a baby or whatever. Right. And like use that with Twitter. And I think, so that's like a way to maybe like get some of those brands that apply.
It's interesting because I think as I've been thinking about it, just like big brand one, I have less of like a straightforward playbook to fix that. I mean, I think, based on things I kind of know about Twitter, I think, the big things that they could do is like, my guess is that auction is like probably pretty jacked up in terms of a bunch of artificial floors and weird boosts in there to make sure that the big brands are actually getting performance. But that's, I think, like kind of a leftover of like the old age. It's almost like, to your point, maybe it's opportunity for them to kind of clear the deck and almost hand over the reins to the big brand demand to the trade desk in some ways. And from an OpEx perspective, at least, Elon could probably cut a bunch of underperforming salespeople. So that would probably
he already cut them, but now he can replace that revenue.
With money. Yeah. The thing that I was thinking about is, as we kind of talked about ways to help Twitter too, is that I think on the DR side and on the sort of SMB side, he has a big opportunity given that he's talked about how he wants to make it into a payments business. I think there's just like an awesome chance for him to kind of go all in and almost become a small B2B payments business where he can go to all these DTC brands and say, listen, we want you on this platform. We'll give you basically, at a minimum some ad credits, but even more so, we'll give you like net 75 payment terms, right? So like that's extremely helpful in like a higher interest rate environment. And in exchange for that though, you have to connect your Shopify account and you have to connect your Plaid account. So we're going to auto ACH our billing, but on net 75. And we are going to get your sales data, which we can then go ahead and use to prioritize which of all these little companies we actually should give a shit about in reality. And, to me, if he could have sort of his sort of engineering team and internal teams working on that while just bending over backwards to fill in sort of the top of the funnel from the trade desk, that feels like those two things combined could be really interesting. And the other thing too that I thought a lot about was that in both scenarios, because you're now running both businesses basically into an auction, you could actually start to set up almost like a points or cashback scheme with your advertisers. And most big advertisers already have that. Like most agencies will negotiate basically some percentage of spend back that they can spend and put back in the auction. And that's a really valuable thing because it actually creates like more density and increases pricing. But the little guys have never had a way to do that. And if he kind of thought of the little guys as being part of his payments platform, he could start delivering basically ad credits into their accounts every month and get collectively, you start to look at like, there's a lot more density in that system. So those are like I feel like if the trade desk part could be pulled off and you can marry that with being really kind of thoughtful around like the payments infrastructure and SMB, I kind of think that business could crush it. I don't know if you guys think that that's like a logical approach.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to get back to the trade desk piece that James Avery was talking about, but I think even before jumping to that, James, you talked a lot about the payments, and I think it's super interesting. But for those listening, like how does a Shopify seller today sign up? Like, what are those terms? Why is this something that can actually move the needle for their business, and why is it something that Elon, if he turns it on, actually has a pretty significant impact for these businesses?
Like most of these SMBs are spending on credit card, which, they may be using like a Brex or a Ramp or a Parker or an Amex potentially. And that used to be a pretty good strategy in a low interest rate environment. You get pretty big lines of credit and you could pay pretty small amount of fees. But now as you see credit tightening, there's like a finite amount of credit that any individual business has. And, the need to pay their bills like really hurts these businesses. Like, that it often takes a while for the revenue to come in from these campaigns. And so in a world where there's a finite amount of credit, by Twitter basically becoming the direct lender, it increases their own customers' buying power. And it actually increases the efficiency of Twitter ads without actually making them more performant because they are now getting interest-free loans to run campaigns.
Essentially, if you're running a DTC business and you're going to spend $5 and your goal is to make 7 to 10 or, whatever that you're getting back from the big challenge they have, right, is just that float of like when they have to pay that 5 versus when they get back that 10, right? And so like Twitter is basically underwriting the float with like better payment terms, then essentially their spend can rise dramatically, right? As long as they can continues to perform and they can fulfill it, you're almost like disrupting VC, right? Because like instead of going and raising $300K to go spend on DTC ads, you're saying, we'll lend you the $300K at a good rate because we're selling you something that, doesn't cost us anything, right?
And it's something, James, that you referenced too, that like it's the big brands have been getting this for years, right? They've been getting extended float well beyond even 30 days. So when you talk about, Procter and Gamble, they're getting kind of that reward scheme that you talked about in ad credits back for committing a certain amount. They're getting very long payment terms. And so they're structuring it in a way that is really beneficial for their business. Whereas the direct to consumer brands, the direct response brands, they're not getting any of that. And so they're having to pay upfront or kind of on a very kind of rapid basis. They're not getting any benefit as spend increases. Their cash flow strapped. And so it's harder for them to scale spend and justify scaling spend on a platform like Twitter.
Yeah. Well, and, ironically, he's got now the scheme with creators where you can basically directly monetize some of your reach. And so like, if he were to kind of embrace sort of this idea that like all the payments infrastructure is combined and you kind of think of ads as like the top of the funnel there, a lot of these creators could actually start to earn and said if they wanted to basically listen, like, I rather get this in ad credits, right? Like Twitter credits versus actual cash, like for a higher kind of multiplier. That's another thing where like you can kind of start to make it like in a weird way, it's like Twitter could become kind of that Venmo where like the money stays inside the system and you're starting to allocate it around it. So yeah, I think that it to me that feels like such a no-brainer for him to deal with the sort of, like the tail and the torso. I do think, James Avery, to your point, like kind of thinking of like the head, you know, if there is a way for these platforms to play nice with Trade Desk, it's gotten to the point now where like I do think it makes sense. I will say when we were at Snapchat, I was like fervently against it. I think Snap is inherently a different platform. It's private versus public. There was a lot of reasons why, like we wanted to make sure that we weren't sort of kind of towing that line, but like hearing a bunch of like, I guess like social walled garden guys talk about their apprehension to this demand. James Avery, are you kind of like, you idiots, there's a way to do this and like you could get a lot of money out of it?
I mean, there's definitely ways to do it. I mean, I think that it's not, I think to differentiate, right? It's not public exchange, like open, just open exchange stuff, right? It's really making sure that you can buy an actual real unit, normal, creative, everything on Twitter, like through the trades, right? I mean, like they have partnerships with like Walmart, Hulu, and lots of people where they've done this, right? And so like the possibility is there. I think they've, like I think you said before, like that, they don't want to be disintermediated, right? Like they want their team of people to manage those brands. But I think it's pretty clear, like Elon doesn't really want to have like hundreds of brand salespeople that are taking people to Yankees games or whatever. Like wait, let somebody else do that, right? Like him get the, get the reward. Maybe he's paying for it, but it's not, you're not building that big sales org inside.
And I think,
Yeah.
part of that too, I mean, James Broward, you talked now from like the bottom up approach, that tail torso, and then James, the head part. I mean, being able to kind of offload that responsibility to a trade desk and then really focus on formats, really focus on, to me, like rebuilding that trust and those relationships with the agencies, the advertisers, the partners. And to your point, not necessarily taking them to lavish dinners and Yankees games, but re-educating them on Twitter, helping them understand why the platform is a good place to be, that they can buy it on the trade desk like they want using data that they have. And I think that's something that, they've been missing. And I think hiring Linda is a pretty good signal that, she's coming from a world in which relationship selling was very important, right? That the buyers understood what the platforms had, what the capabilities were, and had that line of communication, that relationship develop. And it's something I think, Twitter really needs to invest in to rebuild that on the larger advertiser side.
Yeah, and to be clear, like Trade Desk doesn't have like salespeople, right? Like you were saying, like you would still have salespeople, but they're doing more market education, right? And they are taking people to the Yankees game, but it's more about you're educating the agencies and the big brands on hey, this inventory is here, you can buy it, the data's there. It's more of than it is like I'm selling in IOs and trying to hit my quota for the quarter.
It's funny if they took that approach, because I do think it would mean they probably could have some significant OpEx savings and you probably could accelerate some of the revenue. It does lead to like they do need to make sure that they have their inventory growing. And right now, if you executed on your playbook, James, and you executed on mine, you may end up being a scenario where they actually do have too much density and prices do kind of get out of whack in terms of performance, which leads to, something that you brought up. I'm gonna call you Kevel James, is, right now they are throttling access to their enterprise API, which is like, if anyone wants to build a Twitter app, they're making you, pay for it. I thought you had like a good point of view of like, you could turn that into a monetization engine and also a inventory creator. Like, yeah, give us kind of your take on that. Like, what were you thinking with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always shocked when people start to restrict the API instead of just monetize the API through advertising. right? Like it always seems like the options are either shut it off because we want to own the customer, or charge a lot for API access. But the other option is that they should just be blending ads into that API access. And if you're not showing enough ads based on the number of API calls you're making, then they can charge. And so basically get them more distribution. I think the challenge is, people are like, well, we can't control the where it's being shown and things like that. So there is some, just like an ad network or like AdSense or something, right? Like there is some work that has to go into making sure that the people that are showing the ads are showing them in the right way, that they click through, that the tracking, those things work. And maybe for the brands, you have to make it optional, right? Like the checkbox that Google checks on by default for you to run ads across their, their network. But, Twitter could do the same thing where it would give them a lot more inventory and it would keep people using Twitter, which obviously is an important thing.
I was just going to say, if only they had bought MoPub. It's like so funny they had it. Like it would fit so well to facilitate. It's such a shame that like that thing got kind of thrown around and all this. But sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to like going back to riff on one of the things you said about like Shopify. Like I think the other thing that Twitter really needs to invest in is like those actual product ads. Like, I don't know if you notice, you'll see a lot of Amazon ads. It's rare that you see Amazon product, right? If I'm a DTC brand, I'm hooking this up to my Shopify account. You have access now to the Shopify product. You have access to the photos, right? You could find some tools that would help you generate good ad images based on product catalogs and brands and things like that, right? To make this even more of a no-brainer for those DTC brands, but to also enable that product level, catalog level ads that I think would increase, right?
Totally. And the fact is, the fact is, because they're becoming a payments platform, it's so obvious they should have Twitter shops.
Then they're just
that are basically,
right? It's just like,
and
make it shoppable, even if it clicks through to Shopify, even if it fulfills on Shopify. If Twitter is a payment app, you could just do a deal with Shopify that you can just transfer the payment to Shopify, one click fulfillment, right?
Yeah, and I mean that is, we talked a little offline, but one of I think the big misses for them right now is every major platform has an app or an integration with Shopify for their ads business, for Pixel implementation, for stores or shops if that's available. Twitter is the one exception. They have an app that, based on all reviews, hasn't been updated in a long time and doesn't even work anymore. And if they're serious about direct response or about e-commerce, you have to have a Shopify app, and just seems like such a miss. And I think, James Avery, to your point, like it kind of goes hand in hand with how they're approaching the API and kind of limiting access to it. It's just kind of a counter view to what you would expect.
Yeah. I mean, it should be intent, right? Like get the Shopify people in, like work with Amazon, right? Like go to Amazon and say, hey, how do we unlock your advertisers when they're buying on Amazon to extend it onto Twitter, right? Like we'll support your product catalog, your feed, attribution. Like Amazon has a really successful DSP that like a lot of people don't think about in the normal ad tech space. But I mean, that's probably, number 2 after Trade Desk, or if you want to go do a partnership somewhere, if you're buying Amazon ads, their Amazon ads are more and more expensive, right? And now you can extend those over to Twitter.
Yeah, and Pinterest is doing that. And I mean, I don't know the performance yet. I mean, ironically, Pinterest is just going to turn into a giant Amazon app because they're going to have so much more demand than Pinterest could probably figure out themselves. And that's not an knock to friends at Pinterest, just a scale problem. But I think it's pretty interesting. I guess maybe kind of switching gears from like how Twitter can reaccelerate growth to can Twitter like battle against this like attack from Zuckerberg or Threads. Kind of wanted to get your guys' take on what you think is going to happen there. I've been personally, I think Threads is awesome. It's obviously a little bit of like, it's like it had that rapid acceleration of users, and now you're seeing like what the actual behavior pattern is. But I have I'm super bullish on it. I think it's going to work out. And I think there's some things that Facebook did to Snap, frankly, in the past that they could then go ahead and do to Twitter right now and create some frustration that we can talk through. But, just kind of curious about your guys' initial take so far on if you're using it and if you believe in it or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I've used it. I think the inertia for me is that Twitter, I've already gone through and kind of followed everyone I like. It's a bit more information, whereas Threads, at least at this point, is a lot more friends and colleagues. And so the content I'm getting is still very different. And so I do want to see how Threads continues to develop. If, there are influencers or personalities that start to develop, from journalism to, sports writers, things that I'm interested in, and how their content resonates on Threads. But right now I use them just very, very differently, but super interested to see how Threads continues to build.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Threads feels a lot like Clubhouse did, right? Where it was like suddenly everybody was talking about it, and then already it's kind of tailing off a little. I mean, for me, it's like it was like getting on there at first was fun. You'd see people join, and you talk to people. You could see stuff, threading stuff, I guess, is the equivalent of like tweeting. But I think the problem is like once you have a public forum, like public town hall, like it's really hard to, right? And it's like I go back to Twitter and it's like, oh, here's like, this, Ravens player that I follow tweeting a bunch of stuff. It's like, I don't think they're on Threads, right? Like we forget that, like the tech people, I think we all forget like the momentum that it would take to really shift people. Like I thought it was a threat first week, and now I'm kind of like, I don't think it's a threat at all.
I think they're going to have to fold it into Instagram more. Like, I think you're going to have to like have it be where you're kind of tweeting from there. And it's sort of a format of Instagram itself. And maybe as a format of like all their platforms, they do it with Facebook, they do it with WhatsApp. And then you can go ahead and like, maybe Threads is the aggregation of that. I do think though that they have so much leverage with these creators. And like you saw this with TikTok, and we saw this when we were at Snap, TikTok was able to just pay to get people to post a bunch of crap. Right. And like people do follow where you go. And also TikTok, they became the largest advertiser like in the United States. Like everyone thinks it was like organic growth. It was like purely just like a corporate takeover. I think at one point I don't know this for a fact. It was after my time at Snap, but I think they were like the largest advertiser on Snapchat at one point. And they basically like took the social networks, like held them captive in a way, right? It's kind of why you didn't have that regulatory push against them, I think, early on. But in a funny way, I think Meta could do maybe the same thing because they can hand over so much of their own inventory to promote these apps. And we saw that with back in the day when we were running Shift, we saw that basically, and we heard this from a good source, and I have no reason to doubt it, but the quote unquote largest advertiser on Facebook for a number of years was actually Instagram. So all the backfill, anytime that there was any form of backfill, if their auction believed that it was more valuable for them to acquire that user to push them over Instagram, they forfeited some of that revenue and did it, which is like kind of mad scientist genius.
Once you know your LTV of the app, like that's just what you can throw in the auction, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's like, and it's also why it's a total just tangent, but it's also why like anyone who's running an auction shouldn't have their own managed service team along with it, because to bid in your own auction is like, just so like the incentives couldn't be worse, right? Like you just like, but that's a total aside. But so that's why like, I'm kind of like, I've taken the counter, which is like, I think they're going to brute force usage of this thing. I think they're going to like basically pull a TikTok and they may be able to, well, and if they could do that, I think they have a huge opportunity to screw with Twitter on the revenue side and just play games like constantly, like even for Q4 this year. And I know it's like, it's too early for them to do it, but I think they should like turn on the Threads ads placement just for like entertainment and for like the big CGs, say it's just an extension of your Instagram campaigns, charge them some whatever amount of budget, but just basically make it where like those teams have to be like, okay, I can either spend a little bit on Twitter or a little bit on this Threads extension and be like, screw it. I'd rather do that. I like Mark more. Like
Kinda
that
like
would hurt.
I mean, the fact that you just said I like Mark more, right? Just says something about where we are.
Yeah.
That's where it is. We know it's there,
And I mean, they did it early days with Instagram and even at FBX. I mean, people buy through Facebook and then they run a network. So they say, Facebook, you push my ad where you think it's going to be most effective. I don't care where it shows up. And Threads can be one of those places. And if it's cheap inventory and it's somewhat effective,
Yeah, but
advertisers will be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter should. That's what I was mentioning, like the Amazon piece. We didn't talk about Google, right? Like Twitter should be going and finding a sugar daddy from the ads front, right? Like instead of trying to be like that level, like just go find your guy who can put you in the checkbox, right? Go get some ads from Google, get some YouTube. YouTube. Apparently, YouTube ads show anywhere anyway. Like, why don't they show on Twitter?
It's Twitter fodder. That's not. You're in the dark. It's funny because we had this idea when we were at Snap, which was like, and I still think some platforms should do it, but like, I think like there is merit to the idea of like Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, maybe even Snap, kind of like the tier 2 guys, basically doing a little co-op together and basically just sharing, doing it in a safe way. You'd use a clean room and everything, but you basically add reach extension to each other. And at this point, at least you could say that like you could get some shared data around it. There's some value to it. Now, I think, it's kind of like Hulu, like eventually everyone's sort of looking around and be like, what is this thing that we've just created? But I think there's an opportunity to do it from a technical standpoint. It's not that complicated. And I know it's funny. I think there's like, maybe not at the highest levels at these platforms, but I think if you went to like maybe the product management leadership kind of level, they all think this actually makes sense, as opposed to like handing the keys over to Amazon or Google. So I'm surprised we haven't seen something there. Yeah, I don't know. I think I still stand by the statement that like Threads will be a real thing. It's just, I agree right now, it is kind of clubhousey and a little lame, but they can fix it.
I mean, it could be a real thing and also not be a threat player, which is probably the most likely scenario, right? Is like we keep seeing that where we're like, what's TikTok gonna kill? And it's like, well, it got really big and it didn't kill anything.
Yeah.
Right. Snap stock down from 80. Snap went from 83 to 13. It didn't kill, but it got hurt, and money moved. It had to, from a performance standpoint. I do think that like, if you look at the tail and torso, the Shopify sellers, the D2C brands, they just have so little time to experiment because like time is money to them. That I do think if Threads could be 80% as from a reach perspective, if it could be even close to Twitter, I think it's like you make it hard for them to ever even get on that thing unless Twitter starts offering them better payment terms. And all the other stuff.
Super easy, right? Like makes it install the Twitter ads Shopify plugin and you're done, right? It's hooked up. It could be even hooked up to your Shopify billing, right? It could just be like, you're going to get billed through Shopify for a month, right? Like you don't even need, right? Like there's some stuff like that somebody who has enough scale could really do that. I love that.
Totally. Well, cool, man. Well, I think we solved it. I guess maybe Elon should send us all an email just with like what do we get? Like a consulting gig for giving these ideas?
Yeah, you should just fly us out. We'll come out there and we'll come out to Market Street. We'll fix it. Give us 6 weeks,
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for doing this. It's fun. I think we got to do another one of these again. We'll find I'll say, maybe we can get some listeners to throw in some ideas, but I think the next thing would be interesting. Maybe we could all do like a business breakdown. We've been talking about this, Daniel, where like from an ads perspective, kind of dive into like the Netflixes of the world, a lot of these new ones that I think are like pretty opaque to people. Cause I think a bunch of different point of views to it that could be there, but thank you, man, for doing this. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I like being, like Monday morning quarterbacking other people's ads businesses.
Awesome. Well, thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you all for having me.